This presentation was originally given at the Zoholics Zoho conference in September of 2017. The title is Encouraging and Managing Scope Creep, which is fairly controversial. I'd like to start with some controversial statements. First off, scope creep is good. Clients are not idiots. Developers are not stubborn. Clients may think so because developers frequently find all kinds of reasons not to add new features after the initial start of a project. But developers really are not stubborn. Okay, the primary project goal is not delivery on time and on budget. It is not elegant design. It is not easy to maintain software. All of these are very valid goals for a project, but they are not the primary project goal, which is to meet the needs of the business. Fundamentally, we are trying to change the world, or at least get it better organized. So meeting the needs of the business is definitely what we're trying to accomplish. That's what the client wants. That's what we want. That's how things progress. It does not necessarily progress by meeting on budget and on time, but not actually having software that does the job. At the start of any software project, the developer is ignorant of the client's needs. The client is unaware of Zoho's capabilities or whatever software platform you're using. The developer is also not fully aware of Zoho's capabilities or, once again, the platform. The pace of technology is changing very rapidly. No developer fully knows everything that's on the plate today, and of course, things could change tomorrow. So the developer is not aware of all the things that can be done with the tools that he's using. And the same thing with the client. They're not fully aware of their own needs. So in the old days, we had a situation where the two parts would get together, the client and the developer. Could be teams, could be individuals. They would get together, they would hammer out a list of the requirements. There would be a document that they would sign off on, and that was locked in. Any change, any new idea that came along was had to have a change request, and those were usually fairly complex and almost designed to prevent changes. Because any new idea, any new thought would just make the project late, over budget, and we couldn't have that. We couldn't have new ideas. We couldn't have innovation. All right, along comes Zoho Creator, which is an online cloud-based programming tool. There's others, of course. I happen to have worked with Zoho for many years, but it changes the entire method of how software is developed. Used to be, you'd sit down, you get the requirements, the programmer goes off, writes software, adds features, burns it onto a CD, sends out the CD to the clients, they install it, they work with it, they say, you know, that's a nice feature you put in, but it'd be nicer if it did, you know, X, Y, or Z. And then the developer would take that information, a couple months later would send out, would compose a new release, send out another CD. The whole process was very cumbersome, very complex. Now, with the online tools, the developer can be talking to the client, and just basically say, "Wait a minute, okay, refresh your screen. Is that what you want?" So the whole process of a change has been greatly reduced. The cost of making a change has been greatly reduced. So, with a new style, we need to rethink how we actually work with software change requests. So as you can see here, we can now have a very iterative and very interactive development cycle. It's no longer that we have a document that has been signed and that is we're working off, and anything else is out of scope. So we want to encourage scope creep. So if the scope of a project does not creep, something is wrong somewhere. We're not encouraging creativity. We're not encouraging new ideas to flow back and forth. It's no longer that the cost of a change is super expensive. So we need to keep things moving. We need to keep the clients and the developers both communicating with new ideas. The client may say, hey, now that I see this screen, I can see something else that would be useful. The developer, as they learn more of what the client needs and more of their own tools, the developer can be sitting there and saying, hey, here's a nice little trick. Do you think this would be useful in screen A, B, or C? So you want that kind of communication. You want, because it's now much less costly to add in a change to make the software different than everybody thought on day one. One of the best examples I've come across as far as coming up with new ideas is the example of a house. Now, everybody knows somewhere in that house there is a kitchen. But if you're standing at the front door, no matter how deep of a thinker you are, you will not be able to figure out where the kitchen is in this house. You need to go step by step. So you go in the front door. Then from the front door, you can see a set of stairs. You go up the stairs, you see the living room. And at each portion, each step you make, you can see further. You can see more detail. So from the living room, you can then see the dining room. You go into the dining room. Now you can see the kitchen. You would never have been able to figure that out from standing at the front door. So it's the exact same thing for the client. Until you build the first screen, they don't know how the screens can work. When you build the second screen and it can be related to the first screen, the client begins to see how their application can work together. So it has to very much be an iterative function. Now, in the old days, we used punch cards to communicate with computers. Each little hole there is a little bit. A column of holes was a byte. And any competent, no matter how intelligent they were, programmer back in the days when we used the punch cards, they would not have been able to envision the current way we work with computers. They would not have thought that we could have a worldwide internet where people can exchange text and videos and voice all easily from a small, very inexpensive device. But when you start with the punch card, then you move to slightly better storage techniques, the diskettes and such. And then the hardware changes. You actually have a keyboard attached to the computer. And then beyond that, you wind up with a monitor attached to a computer. And each step, you can see a little bit further on how things can be a little bit better. And this is how software needs to be developed. This is how projects need to evolve. You can't do it by saying, on day one, here's our list of requirements, no changes are allowed. So basically, another word for scope creep is innovation. Now let's talk about some other ways of encouraging and managing scope creep, because as we've just discussed, scope creep is good. All right, so first I want to show you some sections that I have in my software contract. So if somebody wants me to build software for them, I have a contract, and there's two important parts in there as it relates to scope creep or innovation. In paragraph 2, the client must test the code within 5 days of delivery. Once again, we're talking about that iterative process. So if myself as a developer releases a new feature, the client needs to test that so I have feedback to know if it does the way they want. Otherwise, if it doesn't and I'm doing other things very similar to that first one, if they haven't told me there's a problem with the first one, well, I'm going to do something very similar in the second one, and we need that feedback. And so, but even more importantly, it's in paragraph 6, is the right to reuse code and techniques. So let me actually go to the contract. And this is on my website. The website is preventingmediocrity.com. And here's the contract. And, okay, in paragraph 6, the parties acknowledge that the software will use existing programming techniques and create new programming techniques to implement the client's specifications. Except to the extent that those techniques embody trade secrets of the client, the parties acknowledge that the developer has a right to reuse these techniques in other software development projects. So this encourages cross-fertilization from one client to another. And just so you know, the sample contract is under the Fees tab. So you can see the sample agreement here. All right. All right. Another area to help encourage the actual scope creep and innovation is user stories. Once again, we're back at my website. Under Zoho extensions, you have something called user stories, which are very common in the agile development world. And let me just edit one of these records. All right, so we have the basics of a user story as a, and what's the role of the user, what do they want to do, and why do they want to do that? Three very simple questions that help the developer understand the client's needs. So from this point, it gives a way of getting the requirements. It helps the developer understand the client's needs. It eliminates that first problem of ignorance. What it also does is, you can see down below, we have a whole paragraph explaining how user stories are supposed to work with some examples. This can trigger into the client's minds that, oh, I can have a whole paragraph explaining how a certain form works. You know, most people would probably make that little leap, but once again, we're showing, we're doing two things here. We're actually giving the client a way to communicate their needs, but we're also showing them how certain forms can work. And you'll see that we build on that same concept. So let's cancel that, and let's go back to the presentation. So we have user stories, and next beyond that, we have a list of modules. So once again, we're going back to the website for samples of this. And here you can see we have a list of all the modules in a particular application. So we have the name of the module, a link name, what's the purpose of that form or report, and you have a whole long list here. If I click on, let's go into open. If I click on open, I can now see the actual form. Okay. Now this is a simple form for policies and procedures, fields and description. Policies and procedures also help the communication between the developer and the client. So this list of modules within the application, there's a spot to indicate the purpose of the module, and this open button gives them gives you an option to open up the document or form or report, whichever it is, as you're writing the purpose. So you're seeing what you're writing about. And once again, it does two purposes. It helps in writing the modules, helps getting the documentation right. It also shows the client, oh, here, I can do the same thing with one of my other forms. Maybe it's an employment form, and I need to open up that while I'm looking at something else. So we're doing a couple things to encourage scope creep. The more possibilities the user gets to see, the more likely they are to ask for similar features. Now, this list of modules is built by a function within Zoho Creator. And if we go into the training videos, you'll see there's a training video all about how to get the list of forms and reports. So it's not that somebody had to sit there and say, oh, here's the name of the report, here's a link name. That's all built by a function. You just click a button and it goes through the entire application and builds the list of forms and reports. Okay, so once again, let's go back to the presentation and let's go into software requests. And this is where we're actually adding in a lot of those functions. All right, so all right, let's go into this one here. The software request is a key component of the user explaining to the developer what needs to be done. And once again, I have a whole video on how this works. But one of the problems with writing documentation is it sits off on the side and nobody sees it. Here, when the client chooses which form report they need changed or have a request to change, the actual documentation from that shows just below it. So here we can see, oh, the policy and procedures reduces memorization needed, it improves consistency and quality. So it shows the the notes that were written about that form. So once again, we're serving several purposes. We are encouraging the documentation to be written and to be consistent as the application evolves. We're helping both the client when they're writing this software request to say, yeah, that's the right form that I was talking about. It helps the developer before they actually make the change. They can say, oh, yeah, that's what that form is all about. And it becomes even more important with reports, which are a little further down. Let's see, we may not have documentation on all these. But with reports, you frequently have several reports based on the same underlying form data, and they only have slight variations. So this helps both the client and the developer make sure that they're discussing the same report. Now, just as we saw in the other form, we have a button that says open up a form report, and we're going to open up the one we're just looking at. So we're looking at, we said we want to make a change on the mission statement, and here it opens up the mission statement report. So the developer can easily see, yes, that's the right one, without having to go through the entire navigation bar trying to figure out where is the report, is it under this one, is it under that one. Once again, the purpose of this is to reduce the cost of making changes. So a software request comes in, the developer can easily and quickly get to the report that needs to be modified, and they could make a modification right here. So it reduces the cost, it encourages scope creep, which, as you know, I like to refer to as innovation. So the whole point of this is to get the cost down so much that making changes, helping the application match the business needs becomes the thing to do. So I hope this new take on scope creep has been useful and gives you some new thoughts on how you can handle your own development cycle.